Hi, I'm Dave Baker, and I'm here with Nick Bradshaw. Nick, you came out in, the early 2000s and made a huge splash with Army of Darkness. Hey, man, don't laugh. That book was huge. I worked in a comic store, and everybody was like, this is the best licensed comic ever.
Awesome. Glad to hear that. Thank you.
When you were hired initially to do that, did you ever contemplate doing likeness comics, like actually trying to draw Ash as Bruce Campbell?
Well, I worked in animation before, and I always had like little side projects where I'd do like model sheets and designs of Ash and Bruce Campbell as Ash, and I was posting them online, and I had like all this Army of Darkness stuff. And then I had a friend of mine who worked in animation with me. He would color backgrounds, and we actually did like some mock Army of Darkness covers. This is before the comic book was announced, where I had him color them up. And it was getting around the web and posted on forums, and I think it was on Joe Q's forum where the guys at Dynamic had seen it. And then they had the license, they just happened to be doing the comic. It was just like a perfect storm, to get the project. And then that's what happened. They contacted me. And at first, it was too good to be true. I thought for sure it was just some buddies that were messing with me until they actually sent the contract. And then that's how I ended up scoring that gig.
The thing that's, I think, so great about those specific comics is that a lot of times licensed comics they're this weird kind of thing where publishers know that they'll sell, and it's hard to do actor likenesses and not have it feel stiff. And that book just felt like there was so much love and so much energy put into all of those pages. Since going from that to things like X-Men and Danger Girl too, you did a run on Danger Girl. Do you find that working in areas where there's not necessarily there's not a lot of natural momentum from Army of Darkness where it's like, it's this thing that I love. Did you have that same passion for other projects?
Oh yeah, I've always been a fan of mainstream comics. I was an X-Men fan when I was a kid, specifically New Mutants. I read a lot of the Hulk when I was growing up, but I was more into the horror comics like House of Mystery, House of Secrets, the old Tales from the Crypt comics, the EC line. That was my wheelhouse when I was growing up. So when Army of Darkness came along, it just sort of fit right in there. And I had been drawing Ash for so many years on my own that it just sort of felt like an old shoe slipping into doing it in a book, which was a lot of fun. I lucked out that happened to be my first pro work and to get recognized. But I've always enjoyed doing superheroes, so it's kind of neat jumping into superhero stuff immediately after that.
Let's talk a little bit about your stylistic kind of evolution, because like you said, you work in animation, and those first kind of couple projects that you did were really, the style was very animation-centric. And lately, you've really been pushing things in a new, Art Adams-esque direction. Is that rude to say?
No, I don't think that's rude. I had met Arthur for the first time at Big Wow, and I was really concerned because, a lot of people say that I adapted too much of it. But then we were talking, and he was saying, well, you have more of that cartoony animated edge. I don't have as much of his polish. I have huge respect for him, but I also try to incorporate other creators that I grew up with. Like, I was a huge fan of Brett Blevins, so I like his bubbly, animated, very expressionistic quality to his characters. I try to play around with that. Alex Toth, the way he lays out and sort of has a very cinematic approach to laying out his paneling. There's a bunch of my creators that I try to incorporate. Michael Ringo, I was a huge fan of his stuff, and I try to put a lot of that in his work. Ed McGuinness, so it's a lot. But I'm not gonna lie, Arthur's influences are definitely prevalent in my work, just because I do appreciate the polish and the work that he puts into a page, and I try to show that respect to every panel that I do as well.
I think that's something though that's really admirable, because when you start out as a creator and you kind of make your first big splash, I think a lot of people are very inclined to continue doing exactly that same thing because that's what made them the money. And to push things in a new direction, which isn't in your case necessarily that risky. People like Arthur Adams. I like Arthur Adams, you like Arthur Adams, But I think it's cool that you were venturing out into new territory with that.
Well, what it came down to, I had an editor when I was working on Danger Girl, Scott Doombeer, and he knew I was an Arthur Adams fan. But when I was doing a book called Rockin' with him, he says, Nick, have you ever tried inking your stuff? And he was sending me all this Arthur Adams stuff, and he was like, Arthur is able to get textures in with his inking, and it works with a cartoonier style. So I started playing around with that. And I took 4 years off of comics. I was working in gaming, but I was doing a lot of sketching in that time for myself. I was taking the odd cover, and I started playing around with inking a lot more. Just because it was right. I found that I could get a lot more solid line. I could get some beautiful textures with the ink, and I studied a lot of what Arthur was doing. I was studying a lot of what Ed McGuinness was doing at that time, and it seemed to just adapt to a cartoonier style better. It just elevated it to a different level. So it was fun to have something to sort of experiment and play with.
Well, I think it definitely shows. Thank you for talking to me. Where on the internet can we find you?
I don't do the Twitter. It's probably the only thing I don't do. I do Facebook. I have an Instagram, so you can pretty much find me there. I post a lot of updates on Instagram regularly.
Yeah, I follow you. I like that stuff a lot. Thank you.
Much appreciated.